if you can't hear me, just raise your hand and I'll start talking louder. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Maneeshika, and I just finished my bachelor's at Stanford and have been here the last 9 months. And I've currently been doing I've been taking a break for my master's, but I'm also enrolled in a master's program at Stanford as well. Both in sort of the electronics engineering, computer engineering field. So my background is in that, in electronics engineering. So if you have any questions about that as well, I'd be happy to answer. But I've been here the last 10 months now, actually. Got here in August, so leaving soon, escaping the monsoon season. But I've been working on solar energy here, specifically grid-connected solar. So what I've been doing is researching a pilot project that's, I don't know what the background is in terms of solar, in terms of energy, but I'll just start from the basics. So there aren't very many grid-connected systems existing in Kathmandu and Nepal. There's one pilot system in Dilbigat, and then there's another very small pilot rooftop system. So essentially something on top of a household that's been connected to a grid. So I've been looking into that, looking at the technical aspects, the more power, energy generation, grid stability issues, so those sort of aspects, as well as the economic and regulatory. So sort of an overall study of the subject for the last 10 months. It's been great. It's been really enjoyable, and I really enjoy talking about my research. So I can also take any questions about that. But I'll sort of talk a little bit more about my background leading up to my work here. So I started out at Stanford interested in engineering. So first of all, I can even start before that. I don't know, are there any of you who are applying to undergraduate schools in the US? Yes, okay. All right, good, fair number. So I'll start even before that. I grew up in Washington, D.C., a little bit south of Washington, D.C., actually in Virginia. And when I was applying to colleges, I sort of looked at this wide range, and I was trying to figure out what I was interested in. So the thing about U.S. colleges, as you might know, is that you don't really have to be interested in anything when you apply. It's one of the boons of going to college in the U.S. because you have this year or two to really figure it out, and it's great. So I knew I was interested in more chemistry, physics angle. I was better at math than I was at writing, and that's generally what I went with, and I took it from there. So I started taking classes my first quarter. So Stanford is a quarter system, so that basically means we have 3 quarters through the year instead of 2 semesters. Each quarter is about 10, 11 weeks versus the 14, 15 weeks of the semester. So I started my first quarter looking at taking a variety of classes, introduction classes, physics, math, whatever, name it, and taking those classes and kind of thinking, all right, I'm pretty inclined towards engineering, maybe I'll test it out. And I took a circuits class, and I really enjoyed it. I loved, in some sort of really nerdy fashion, I loved working with circuits, loved working with the oscilloscope and all of that. Some of you might be able to relate. I started taking more classes in that field. But I also knew that I had interest in a variety of other fields. I've always been interested in sort of politics, I've always been interested in development, and more sort of design-oriented things. So one of the benefits of going to a school that's not just an engineering institute or not just a liberal arts institute is that you have all these classes that you can take. You have a lot of opportunities available to you. So I started doing that, and so I was studying electrical engineering, sort of focusing that in the academic sense, but I also use a lot of my time to work on some other independent projects. So sort of, there's a group some of you might have heard of called Engineers Without Borders. So some of you are nodding your head. They do a lot of sustainable energy development projects. So in the sense of when Selena mentioned that I worked on a solar cell phone charging kiosk, that was through a similar group. And it's really fun. You have a group of students working together and working with perhaps an NGO, working with some other organization to develop this in school. And it's really an outside project, it's not a class. So I did a couple of these projects a bit more independently, and just to explore that potential. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. These were very short-term, like 2-month projects or something. It wasn't long-term at all. But I realized that I loved what I was doing in my classes. I loved electrical engineering, but I couldn't really focus on that. I had to combine it with something else. That's really what I wanted to do. Is what I've always wanted to do. Which I was really fortunate to realize that early on, and it's what sort of propelled me to come towards kind of doing Fulbright. I applied in my senior year, so that my 4th year to come here, and work on a long-term project. So I applied. I wanted to work in sort of the energy field, either rural electrification or something along those lines. And I didn't end up working in a rural area. I worked in Kathmandu, so it was quite different. But and I wanted something that was long-term, so I could experience, the setup of a project, and also how it goes, how it works over time, but also the end results and what the responses are to any sort of development project. And I've worked, so it's been a really great 10 months. I've worked. I've gotten experience not only in the energy field, but also sort of in the large-scale NGO field, how those work. But also, the NGO that I'm collaborating with is very small. It's like maybe 10 people tops. It's so tiny, and how that works in this sort of area, how that works in any sort of country. So it's been a really interesting spectrum, and meeting people as well. I decided, so one decision that I made last year, and I've come to appreciate it, is I started my master's at the end of, is there some feedback on this? Oh, okay. So I started my master's at sort of the end of my undergraduate. And I could do that because I decided to do it at the same school. And some schools allow that. And it's been really helpful to me because essentially I can take classes of my master's and my bachelor's at the same time, or could. But one decision I made was to take this year off. So sort of stop in the middle of my master's and take a year off, which is a really interesting decision. And I'll be going back in September to my master's, so I can't really tell you if it's a good decision or a bad decision yet. I might end up not being able to take any exams, who knows, but it's been great having this sort of gap year in between, at least, to figure out what I want to do and then go back to take classes with sort of a renewed interest. So we can also talk about that a little bit further for any of you who are going into masters, taking time off, choosing these programs and everything. So let me take a look at my notes here, see what else I should talk about. All right. So I wanted to also talk a little bit about sort of choosing programs. So half of you, I guess it's maybe half and half. Half are going for undergrad, half are going for masters, it seems like. And it's very different choosing an undergraduate program versus choosing a master's program, and especially in the US. An undergraduate program, you kind of, at least depending on what you're interested in, you want to go for something that's broad. You want to have all these opportunities. You want to meet so many different people, and it's great. You have 4 years where you'll really just enjoy yourself and learn a lot, all different fields. I mean, I loved, one of my favorite classes I took my sophomore year was about international security. And honestly, I had to take it because of a requirement, but I mean, I ended up loving it and taking so many classes in that area. So, you really get exposed to a variety of subjects. But when you do your master's, it's much more focused. When you do any sort of graduate program, it's much more focused. And you start off, even when you're applying, you start thinking, all right, so these are the fields. And for example, at my school, we have, you have to choose sort of your focus in electrical engineering. So there are broad focuses. There's communications, there's circuits, there's physics. You can go all the way to the computer science side. You can stick, going towards lasers. You can do anything. But what it means is you have to sort of maintain. You can take all those classes, but you have to maintain a focus in one subject at least. So you have to maybe do a couple of projects in that area. You have to take classes, you have to take very high-level classes in that area. So going into your master's, it's a little more difficult. You want to sort of have a more, you want to have a clear idea of what you're actually interested in. And that's oftentimes hard to get, but oftentimes it helps sort of with those undergraduate classes as you specialize and specialize further to learn about all those things, and you'll learn what you really enjoy, what you're really interested in. So I decided to stay at my school. Partly one, it was easy. I was staying at my school. I wouldn't have to move. But the other reason was that I'm very interested in energy, but I'm also very interested in computer hardware, computer engineering. My school, Stanford, offers sort of a wide range of things. There's the electrical engineering department that's right next to like the environmental engineering department, but on the other side there's also the computer science department. So it offers the sort of flexibility to take classes from all these different areas. And that was very important when I was thinking about classes, thinking about how do I want to structure my master's program. A master's program is really short. It's like maybe a year, maybe 2 years maximum. It's short. You want to make sure that you use your time really wisely. You take the classes that you're interested in taking. You're taking classes that you think will give you the best background for what you're interested in, even if they're the toughest classes that are offered. It's sort of you want to come in with more of a focus than you do with undergraduate, which is a little daunting at times because honestly, like how do you even know what you're interested in, right? Like you don't. It's hard to tell. It's beneficial to have that sort of flexibility between saying, all right, so I can switch between this whatever class. I can take one circuits-oriented class, or I can take one biology class, I can take another physics class or something like that, and really switch between the two. Another very important thing going into a graduate school program is sort of the professors, the teaching, the research that's there and in school. A lot of schools that Stanford is a big name school. It's a big name research school, all right? But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best fit for everyone. That doesn't necessarily mean that the research that you're interested in is going to be featured at Stanford. All right, it might be better at some state school. It might be better at another school. And in the U.S., a lot of these, University of California, University of Berkeley, those schools get a lot of state funding. They're public universities, and they get state funding. And sometimes their graduate programs are better funded. So that means sometimes your research might be better funded if you go through a state school like that. Those are all things sort of like keep in mind when you're looking at these master's programs. What's your research interested in? So again, going back to sort of what I was focusing on, I came in, like I said, looking at a variety of different projects. And one aspect of going to Stanford that I really enjoy is what's called the D School. It's called the Design School. And it's not really well known, sort of gaining in popularity. But they offer these crazy classes. You can do, these classes where you can do really cool things. There's one that essentially, over the course of 2 quarters, so about half a year, you go from zero to building a product to being able to sell that product and market that product and learn all these things over the course of 6 months, which is crazy. You're meeting with investors at the end of 6 months. And it's really interesting, and that's one of the things that really drew me towards, it sort of kept me in the school. It's something you get these opportunities to do something completely different, not oriented with classes, not oriented with research, something that's more practical, which really appeals to me. Like, how do you maintain this? How do you switch from academia to being practical? All right. So I can keep rambling on for quite a while. But maybe I should take some questions now, or yeah, does that sound good? If there are no questions, I'll keep talking, no problem. But let's take a break. So any questions? Yes? It's up to you.
So where the difficulties were you were in the process of something?
Yeah, good question. Yes, of course. Yeah, it's very informal. Is that me, or is that the air conditioning? It's maybe me. Do you think it's probably me? All right, so during my project here, right? Yes, so it's a lot of difficulties, and some of the main ones is really adjusting to working in a foreign environment, foreign country, which I'm sure many of you can relate to if you're trying to get over, if you're going to the U.S. for the first time. So I'll talk about two different ones. Difficulties in my project, specific to my project, certainly difficulties in getting people to respond in time when I wanted to, and arranging things, just sort of logistical difficulties. Difficulties with my project, to a certain extent, in terms of the actual solar panels and so. Adjusting here was quite interesting, and one of the, partly because adjusting to any foreign country is completely different. You have to learn the culture, you have to figure things out. I got lost, I still get lost. I got lost continually for the first month or so, kind of going in circles all the time. I had two maps. I had a map with all the transportation and Google Maps, and I had to cross-reference it constantly on every street corner. It's quite difficult, but I think I can say I know Kathmandu quite well now. But yeah, so that's part of the difficulty, really adjusting to the time schedules, adjusting the fact that governments work on Sunday. That's not really something that I'm used to. Definitely, trying to meet people, and I think one of the things I learned quite early on is I would have to really pick up the phone and call some random person and say, "Hi, I'm doing research here on solar energy. Can I come talk to you?" And that's a hard thing to do. That's a really hard thing to do because most of the times, frankly, why they have no incentive to talk to you. Really, they don't. And one thing I had to develop really quickly is this 2-second, what's called the elevator pitch. So I'd really quickly go and say, all right, I'm a Fulbright student, this is my background, this is what I'm doing. I would be really interested in hearing your perspective on this government regulations or subsidies or something very particular and tailored to the person I was meeting. And really, come into a meeting, knowing how to come into a meeting with whatever person with a good list of questions, with a good list of knowledge of what they're doing, knowledge of what they're talking about, and things like that. So that was definitely a learning curve there, and how to really meet people. People that I have no idea who they are or anything with their background. That was quite tough. In terms of actually, working in a foreign country, you're going to have to go with sort of the cultural norms. The first time someone told me, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not in my office. There's a wedding I have to attend," I was sort of taken aback. I'm not really. People don't really tend to go for weddings for a week on end, and in some other place. And I was not used to the fact that October with the sign, November with Tihar, and December with weddings were kind of off season in terms of work. I wasn't really prepared for that, but it's okay. I learned it, and you figure these things out pretty quickly. It's really valuable to have some sort of network when you go in. So when I got here, there was the other Fulbright community, other students. So we were all sort of in the same boat. We would come here for, some of us had been here before, some hadn't. Some knew language, some didn't, that sort of thing. And we were all here for the same purpose, for research, and all here for the same length of time. So it's really helpful to have, one or two people that that you can sort of, when you have a really stressful day, when you've had a very terrible meeting or something, just sort of go to and be like, why did this happen? How can I fix this sort of thing? Someone you can relate to. And I'm sure you guys will find that out, when you go to the U.S. I know at my school, the international student community is really strong, and you really bond over the fact that you're coming to a completely new country, that you may or may not have family in this country and stuff like that. So, yeah, so long answer to your question.
So the D school is about design thinking.
Yes, yes.
So did you use that method in your project?
Well, that's a good question. A little bit. So the D-School is, like we mentioned, about design thinking. It's a lot of what's called human-centric design. So you go and you talk to people, whatever people, whoever you want. People, maybe waiting in line in Baktini or something. Like, all right, how do I better the shopping experience for you? How can we design it so that it's better? How can you, whatever. So that sort of thinking. And I think one of the things the D-School really taught me is, as an engineer, you're really focused on, all right, this is my problem set, there's a right answer, there's a wrong answer, there's always a right answer, there's always a wrong answer. And this really taught me, like, all right, maybe you want to think outside the box. You want to think about things that maybe aren't practical, things that aren't really, maybe wouldn't work in the actual real-world sense, but might lead to an idea that does work. So it was in this project, not as much, but I have used it in other projects, in like the smaller scale, like the Engineers Without Borders, those sort of projects. So really, what do people want? What would be the most useful thing here for the people? And it involves a lot of on-ground research, which I think is great, and really just talking to people and everything. So I would say, for my situation in particular, not here, but yes, in other projects I have used that thinking. I think it's very valuable are you an engineer? No, well, as like a scientist, engineer, really anyone who's focused on their own subject, it's really valuable to get something that's outside of the box.
So actually I'm working on an innovation lab in a rural project.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm interested in social innovation.
Okay.
And we have been using this method to create rural innovation.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, it's been
Nice.
very
Yeah,
useful.
yeah. It's been useful? That's
Yeah.
good. Glad to hear that. Any other questions?
My name is Balden. I'm from Balden. Presently, I'm working as a sales officer for this ultra solar energy steel company.
Oh, okay.
So, for the students here, I want to know how the solar energy works. Maybe it would be useful for them.
Yeah.
Also in the further studies.
Sure, sure.
How was your finding regarding the government regulations?
Oh, gosh.
That part?
Yeah, of course. All right, so there are, maybe I should just remove this. I don't know if I can talk loud enough, I think. Well, this is gone. 1 second. So my research was on grid-connected solar, and I'll keep this really short because I could really talk forever about my research. So what you generally see in the households around is just off-grid systems, sort of solar home systems that work just for the houses or just for the office or so. But what I was looking into is, all right, well, we have these systems. We have places like the World Food Program that has a really nice 12 kilowatt system that doesn't, that they aren't using during the weekends. That there are other sort of areas like this. So what if we take that excess energy they use and connect it back to the grid? Is that possible? And well, the short answer is yes, it is possible. It is possible in a technical sense. However, it sort of comes up to the government regulations that you were asking about. Grid connectivity is not strictly defined by the grid code. It's a case-by-case basis. So it has to be approved on any system that really legally is the key term, legally wants to connect to the grid, has to get approval from the government. And that's honestly quite difficult. It involves a bit of an obstacle course, really, to get through that. And what I've been talking about rather recently, and what a lot of people in this field that I've been working with are talking about is, all right, why don't we just allow this? Why don't we allow this grid connection? And we'll say, the minimum maybe that you have to pay if you during the monsoon season, during the middle of the day, so that's when that's basically when the demand is the lowest, and monsoon season, as you all know, is when load shedding is also the lowest. So suppose during that time, the minimum that the government would sort of buy the energy from. So let me step back a little bit. The way it works is, if if I have a house with a solar panel, I am going to sell my energy to the NEA. So I'm going to sell whatever units to the NEA, and then the NEA is going to go ahead again and then sell it to my neighbors. Basically, that's sort of the sharing system that works. But the NEA doesn't want to sell at a rate that is lower than what they buy for, right? So if they buy it for me for 10 rupees, they're not going to turn around and sell it to my neighbor for 5 rupees. That doesn't make any sense. So what they're saying is, all right, I'll buy it from you for maybe, for 3 rupees. That way I'll make a profit. But the consumer, on the other hand, is saying, all right, wait a minute. I spent something like 4 lakhs on my system. If you're only giving me 3 rupees, I'm not really going to be able to recuperate my initial investments. So you come to this issue called grid parity. It's really this point where the consumer and the supplier and the seller are pretty much equal. They're both comfortable with that selling rate. And that's the issue, that's really the crux of the matter when you're talking about renewable energy, when you're talking about grid-connected issues. You want to achieve this point where both sides, both parties are happy. That currently the selling rate, so if I install a 1 kilowatt system on my house and I sell energy, or 1 2-kilowatt system, and I sell energy to the NEA, over the course of 25 years, if I sell at a rate around 14 rupees, I would break even after 25 years. But 14 rupees is still expensive. 14 rupees is much more expensive than what you sell it for. However, there's the other side of the issue. Currently, I'm getting 0 money for connected to the grid, right? If I get even maybe like 2-3 rupees, I'd be happy, because something's better than nothing. So that's sort of the part where the government regulation comes in, and that's where it is currently. So there is no regulation. From what I've heard, people are talking about it. So I assume the Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Science and Technology, they're talking about it and might or might not go forward. It's really hard to say. This is a large, the selling rate. The fact that you hear solar is too expensive. Well, the fact that solar is too expensive is sort of one of the main obstacles. There are others as well. But that's sort of where it is. Will it happen? To be honest, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that'll happen.
Can I know some advantages of interconnected system?
Say that again?
Advantages of interconnected system.
Grid connected system? So the main advantage is that you can locally redistribute this energy. So you suppose if like I said, if I'm in an office and on Saturday I'm closed, I'm just sort of I have this energy that it's being generated that I'm not using. And suppose my batteries are also full, I'm not using it. And so I can resell it, and that's a direct benefit to the consumer, and then also to sort of the people around the consumer. Another sort of, one of the main benefits, really, the one that you hear about the most, is that theoretically with a grid-connected system, you don't need batteries. Because what's going on is, all right, during the day, I'm going to generate my own energy, and then if there's less load shedding, if there's no load shedding to very few hours of load shedding during the night, I'll just use the grid. It's not a problem. I'll just and during the day, if I'm not at home, then all the energy goes to the grid, and I'm earning money. So that's sort of the benefit. It's more of a financial benefit, because not only are you earning money, but you also don't have to you don't have to pay for a battery system. So those are the main ones. From the utilities perspective, it's sort of this way of, it's very little work that they have to do to get some excess energy. It's not a lot, to be honest, of what's already installed. Of what I was looking at, grid connect of rooftop systems. If you want to talk about like the large-scale systems of, in Dhobigat, there's a 680 kilowatt system. You might have heard about. The energy minister came out, I think, last week saying that she wanted to build a 150 megawatt system that's grid connected. So if you're talking about those systems, that's sort of like a different ballgame. That's directly feeding into the grid. That's directly supplying the NEA, the utilities, with energy. So that's that benefit.
How much will it be reliable?
Reliable? Reliable is sort of, it depends on what you're looking at. sort of a hard question to answer. So reliable, if you have sort of this system without batteries, the problem is anytime that if you don't have load shedding, anytime when there is load shedding, you're basically disconnected from the grid, so you can't feed into the grid. So that's automatically like this loss that you feel. One of the other points of reliability that comes up, obviously there's the fluctuations that's associated with solar. You might have a sunny day, you might have a cloudy day, that happens. That there are ways to sort of go around that. That's largely why you have a battery system, in case you have a cloudy day, you want to make sure that you can still get energy somehow. So that's sort of another reliability. A third issue that is mentioned less often, sort of one of the more technical or sort of like later stage issues, is grid stability. So how stable is the voltage at a certain point when I connect to the grid? And at certain places, so one of the slides I was looking at is in Imidol, right outside the ring road. And that happens to be not very stable at all. That happens, the grid code is, theoretically, if you plug in your computer into any of these walls, you should be getting 230 volts. Theoretically, plus or minus 10%. You're not getting that in Imidol, unfortunately. So that's there's that issue as well, because it often goes below what the acceptable limit is, and you're again cut off from the grid. So that's sort of broad.
While talking about the application of the solar power,
Yes.
captured from photovoltaic cells.
Yes.
One of the major problems we're having that even the finest or the most efficient capacities of this day are having problems, certain storage problem.
Yeah.
And what are the new sorts of technology you and your project unit you are offering to the general public or the people of Kathmandu?
In terms of the solar technology?
Solar technology, because most of them, due to the load shedding problem as well, most of the people in Kathmandu are bound to install solar panels in their houses. And the major problem is that solar machines are so efficient and they fade away within a year or so. So what are the new sorts of technology?
So there, within a year, so there's sort of a couple of different issues there. In terms of technology, you're most likely not going to get a very wide range of efficiencies. You're going to get a pretty limited, 15 to 20%. That's about how efficient a solar panel would be in general. And that, when you start talking about efficiency, it's like a direct relation to sort of cost. Right? You can get a great system, you can get a really reliable battery, you can get a really efficient solar panel, or a much more efficient solar panel, but you're going to have to pay more. Right? So that's sort of the trade-off that comes in. In terms of the 1 year issue, maintenance is a huge issue. Is that what you're talking about, sort of with the 1 year? Yes. Maintenance is a huge issue, and maintenance in terms of, all right, what I was looking at is focusing on more community systems, right, like systems in a college or something like that. And that basically means is that someone has to clean the panels, someone has to take care of all this, make sure that the system is running constantly. And that was a huge issue while I was here the last 10 months. So you asked about problems. I mean, that was one of the problems. We kind of constantly, we were monitoring the system, so we knew exactly when, like the inverter is down, or when the load went off, or when the batteries went too low. We know exactly when that happens, and went and sort of fixed it. But maintenance is an issue. I would hope that systems last longer than 1 year, and I would say sort of. So like I mentioned, it's a community system, so those systems sort of have the backing of companies and such. If you're talking about it from a home system, home perspective, that's sort of slightly different. That basically means you're going to have to make sure, you're going to have to be a very active consumer. You know when, all right, it's a really sunny day, maybe I can use the washing machine today at 1 in the afternoon, or something like that. Know these issues, so you're not. I'm not going to use the washing machine at like 6 and then completely deplete the battery, because that's not very. That doesn't really help the battery that much. So maintenance sort of comes into the idea of being this smart consumer and knowing how to use a solar system, knowing just being cognizant of the fact that sometimes your battery is 100%, sometimes it's 40%. Well, hopefully not 40%, but like, 80% or something. And sometimes you can't keep the air conditioning on all night long, something like that. Yeah, I hope systems last longer than 1 year. I can't speak to that. And the only thing I would say I would personally recommend is to make sure that you trust the company that you're using. Yeah. What other questions? Any questions about applying to colleges, applying to graduate school? I'm sure that's probably more forefront on your mind than solar energy, to be honest. It would be on my mind personally, so if you're applying to colleges soon. So we can talk about that as well.
So it has been 90 days that you have been here.
Yes.
So talking about the services that you received here in Kathmandu, maybe the welcome environment. So what would be your ratings for Kathmandu?
For Kathmandu, I was talking to Selena earlier today, but I'm very sad to be leaving Kathmandu. I really enjoyed living here. That being said, I have possibly the most flexible schedule in the world. I mean, I can generally go to a museum at like 2 in the afternoon and then have no consequences about that. So I've had a very flexible schedule, and I've been very lucky with that. One thing I would say that I really appreciate about Kathmandu, and I know my friends can relate to this, is that it's very easy to get access to people here. Very easy to get access. Like I said, cold calling government officials, or even emailing them. And honestly, I think my response rate was over 90%. Most people said yes. I'd be very happy to talk to you. I'd be very happy to meet you. I can't really think of an example of someone who's like, no, I don't have time for you. So that's great. I mean, that's a really special environment, and you're not going to get that in the U.S., unfortunately. You're not going to get that in a lot of countries. So I've appreciated that about Kathmandu, and I think if anyone's doing any sort of research, take advantage of that. Take advantage of the fact that you really can probably email someone in, I mainly talk to people in like the NEA. You can email people in the NEA and they probably will respond to you, probably. But yeah.
So ratings?
Ratings, ratings on what system? Out of 10? All right, I don't know if I can give it a rating. It's hard to say. I've enjoyed it. That's all I can say, really. I'm sad to be leaving. I've managed to get around the city without having a personal vehicle, which is great. I really think that's, I love cities, so the fact that I can get around, without having a car or a scooter or a bicycle or something, I think is really beneficial. It's excellent. I've enjoyed trekking, so I've enjoyed doing that. The fact that it's so close. I hope some of you can take advantage of the fact that trekking is so close. I highly recommend it. But yeah, I dislike Tamil. I really hate Tamil, but what else can I say about that? I hated it about 2 weeks in, so. But yeah.
What were your strengths to get into Stanford?
All right, so off the bat, let me just say that so a lot of these schools, and especially the ones that have a very low admittance rate, it's a bit of a luck game, really. It's kind of like poker, right? You can't predict. You cannot predict at all how you get into schools, what schools you get into. It's really difficult. So honestly, I would say but at the end of the day, I think I read this somewhere, but what these schools are really looking at is to fill their classrooms with a diverse set of people who each person has a very deep intellectual passion for, 1 or 2 subjects, that really is passionate about something. So what they're looking for, honestly, is what are you interested in? What keeps you going? What keeps you motivated? Like, why are you going to college? Honestly, at the end of the day, why are you going? Not, obviously you want a bachelor's, yeah, I agree. I agree, I wanted that too, but why are you really going to college? And what do you really want to do. And a lot of times what you think that answer might be is, you probably have an answer that you're thinking of in your head, and you're probably thinking, all right, that's not what colleges want to hear. But that's fine. It doesn't matter. Like that's another really awesome thing about U.S. colleges. It doesn't matter. You could write like, I really want to go to college. I really want to go here because I am an awesome juggler, and the juggling club here is phenomenal, and that's why I want to go to Stanford. And that's a legitimate reason. Like honestly, that's a completely legitimate reason to go to school. And I mean, you probably want to back that up with good grades and a good SAT score, but what they're really looking at is how, what keeps you going, what really motivates you, and for me it was, like I said, an interest in engineering, but an interest in doing that in a lot of other ways. And I did a lot of work in high school. A lot of sort of research work with science, with chemistry, but also a bit of community service with really teaching other students, teaching girls in particular in middle schools and elementary schools about science. So that was something I was passionate about, the fact that I loved science, I loved engineering, but I also loved teaching it and sharing it with other people. And that's sort of what I talked about. Other questions?
I wanted to ask more about the Fulbright program than about the Asian colleges. How did you come to choose Nepal for your research and study? Like, does Nepal have a reputation of being a power-deficit country even in the US or what?
That's a good question. Well, I chose it actually for more research purposes because I was interested in energy studies, and the energy situation sort of lends itself to being studied, frankly. And solar energy has such high potential here, so that was what I was looking at. So that was sort of that aspect of it. The Fulbright program is, so what they're looking for is, someone to spend a year, at least from the U.S. It's different for people applying to the U.S. on a Fulbright, but from the U.S. What they're looking for is someone who has some sort of idea of what they want to do, a research project that's whatever, anything that's either really great for the community or just something that's you're academically passionate about, and really sending them there for a year. So I applied you have to finish your bachelor's. So I was applying concurrently with my last year of bachelor's, and yeah, that's really, I can't really speak too much about it, but my process was, so I went about thinking, sort of learning more about the energy scenario here before I did my application, finding some collaborators that I could work with. So I found an NGO, and figuring out this project, and really having that all together, so having this statement, and this purpose of why do I want to do this, why does this interest me, and that was really the application process. And yeah, that's basically it. Applying from here to the U.S. as a Fulbright is definitely different, and that's more focused on sort of like a master's program or PhD program or something like that. And there are various other requirements. I think you have to have worked in the country for a few years before, so yeah, there's something else there.
I was kind of surprised, I read a packet on Fulbright program, and they said that you can't study engineering. So I was surprised when you said that you are an engineering graduate.
You can't study engineering?
Yeah, right? In Fulbright.
From this year.
Okay, so when I saw that you said that you can't study engineering or computer science as a Fulbright graduate from Nepal.
Oh,
so I was kind of
from
surprised that I thought that it worked the same way in the US.
No, they actually like having engineers the other way around, because most of the grantees are more of a social science realm. So.
While you're talking about interests, do you think the bracket of the interest like a certification of?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, for applying for colleges? I mean, you could. It doesn't hurt to back it up, obviously, but...
Is it necessary?
Sorry?
Is it necessary?
Necessary? What kind of certificate? Like, would you look at a certificate?
Are they going to mean that in their interest?
It's not necessary. I would not say it's necessary. You don't really need to. It's kind of an honor system. You sign in a resume with your application. At least I think I did. I remember that. And what you write on your resume, they kind of assume that you've done that and that you know how to do it. And a lot of these schools have interviews, and they'll ask you this stuff about like what you've done and all that. And it's pretty clear if you say I know how to speak French, and you don't know how to speak French, and they ask you a question. It's pretty clear. So it's like they figure you can figure it out. I would say certificates are necessary. I don't think it would hurt, but yes.
Any advice that you would like to give other lecturers how does that switch from their experience?
Okay. This is a harder question to answer. I think so. One of the things that I did a lot of research when I was applying to my undergraduate school. Before I even chose, the way I went about it is I chose 12 colleges. And I don't know if this is what you're encouraged to do, perhaps it is, but in our school, you choose 12 colleges. You choose, 3 colleges or something that are really high up there, like Harvard and this sort of colleges. And then you choose 4 or 5 that are, all right, most likely I'll get into these schools. And then you choose 3 or 4 that are what are called safety. So yes, I'm definitely, I'll probably get into these schools. Those sort of schools, like, all right, they're good, but they're also there for sort of hedging your bets, as they say. So before there's one other thing, yeah. So before choosing those 12 colleges was actually really difficult for me. I visited a lot of those colleges, which I was able to do. It's going to be slightly difficult for most of you to visit these colleges. But I went on their websites. I read a lot of like the Princeton Review, the Barron, all those books, and like went through and really figured out. And they talk a lot about like, this college, Columbia, is in the middle of New York City, so a lot of the college life is surrounded around New York City. It's surrounded around being in a city. So some people like that, some people don't. You can say like so I'm very particular about my geography. I'm a bit of a snob in that sense. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I grew up like on the East Coast, and I really could not imagine going to Texas or going to like, South Dakota. I mean, they're great schools in that like the massive middle range of of America, but I couldn't imagine going there. I just didn't want to do it. So those schools are automatically all out for me. I looked at scholarships, so a lot of them talk about, this is what the financial aid offers. Schools, the top schools have great financial aid, but there are other schools that are sort of joining this ranks. Wellesley is one of these, but that is debt-free. It's what's called debt-free. So again, this may not apply to international students as I say this, so this may not be as applicable to you, but I looked at those sort of things. So I would say, choosing those schools is sort of, it's not a process that's actually, it's not an easy process. It's not a process that you're like, all right, whatever, I know Harvard, I know Princeton, I know Yale, put those on the list because I know those schools, and then, well, my cousin went to this school, so maybe I'll put that on the list. I mean, that doesn't work that well because maybe, it might be a good school for your cousin, but it might not be a good school for you. So you really want to sort of choose and see. From what I've heard over the past 10 months, there are certain schools that maybe are more favorable to international students, so probably want to be in favor of those schools as well. But those are the main tips I would give for really choosing colleges. For applying for colleges, I did something called an early admission. Is that allowed for international students? Okay. You should all do that. You should all do that. if you are applying for undergraduate schools, you should pick one. Maybe like I ended up applying to Stanford early. It's a funny story. The day before my application was due, I wasn't going to apply to Stanford. I was going to apply to MIT. And I thought about this. I thought long and hard, and I was like, all right. I ended up telling my mother, MIT's cold. It's Boston. It's long hauls of just engineers. I don't think I want to go there. Even if I got in. She's like, all all right, well, why did you choose Stanford? I mean, it's equally good school. So that kind of really derails what I said earlier about researching your schools, but it's sort of how it goes as well. But yeah, so definitely apply early. Choose don't, and what I would recommend for early admit application is don't choose a school that you think you're going to get into. Choose a school that you don't think you're going to get into. I'm sorry, there's probably a school you don't think you're going to get into. Just because early admission actually sort of, the acceptance rate is slightly higher. Very slightly, but slightly, and that slightly helps you in any way possible. So go with that. Yeah, that's sort of the advice I recommend. Finish your applications early. So, any last questions? Last question. Anyone? Yeah. Oh yeah.
Most of the photovoltaics used in the silicon, and those cells. The major problem with those cells are that it is good to use those cells.
Yes.
But I also hear that scientists all over the world and engineers all over are busy keeping cells of lead and silicon that can make rounds of production energy in 2 stages of similar to the photoelectric effect. First by excitation of one electron, and then again excitation of another electron without loss of much amount of heat energy.
Okay.
Then why cannot this technology be applied to the silicon cell itself?
Why can't this technology apply to silicon? Well, I can't say specifically, but I would assume silicon cells, the way it works is essentially the same excitation of electrons, but you dope the cells, right? You have to dope them, p-dope them, and n-dope them. And that's the way that you get the actual current. That's the way you can actually generate and maintain a current. So I assume that process doesn't lend itself to this two-step that you're talking about. But that's really, that's the only thing I assume. I don't actually know. I don't have the back about the other thing you're talking about. But yeah. Hope you find a more satisfactory answer than that. All right. Any last questions? I can stick around for a little bit if anyone has one-on-one questions as well. I don't know if that's generally done, but the auditorium is fun. Well, thank you very much for coming, and I hope this was helpful.